Welcome to Charity and Biscuits, a series of open and honest conversations with those who work in and with the charity sector. Emma, Willder and guests will discuss the issues affecting small UK charities, highlight great resources and welcome listeners to a wider community of people in the know. Hit the subscribe button now and stay tuned for real behind-the-scenes chat.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Charity and Biscuits. Today I'm joined by two lovely ladies from K&K Legal Consulting, and I will hand over to them so they can introduce themselves.
I guess I'll start. I'm Kirsty. I'm half of K&K. Myself and Kate met at university a few more years ago than we care to remember. Worked in high street practices together and separately, and then 4 years ago had children, or more children for Kate, and decided that the corporate world didn't really work for us in terms of, you know, the flexibility. Even though you would thought that law firms would be the ones that were flexible, they were not. So K&K was born to work around our children, and also because we have a passion for working with startups, people that really have that dream and get up and go and want to get started. So we now focus on giving legal advice to startups and small businesses, and just then helping them throughout their journey. And with that comes some charity work or charity elements as well.
Yeah.
So,
I'm Kate. Hi, the other half of K&K Legal Consulting. As Kirsty said, we met a long time ago. Yeah, we work with startups, we work with some CICs, we've helped some charities with various policies and legal documents that they need. So yeah, that is our passion, is getting the help and advice early on in the process so that they can build those strong foundations to be able to grow whichever route they decide to take.
Today we're going to be talking about the difference between CICs and charities, which I'm asked about a lot. Yeah, and I'm sure you guys are asked about a lot as well. So just to kick us off, what do you think are the main differences between the two models, shall we say?
I would say the main differences are the access to funds, for want of a better word. So obviously charities heavily rely on funding, donations, gift aid, whereas a CIC can be run more like akin to a business, and can have services, products which bring funds in. They can also apply for grants depending on their setup. But yeah, that's one of the main differences.
One of the things I see is when I'm having these conversations with people, is one of the first questions I ask is, how much control do you want over the organisation? Because a lot of people come to me and go, we're thinking of setting up a charity. I want to set up this charity. My first question is, do you want to be paid? Yeah. And if they go yes, and go, right, well, in that case, whilst it can be a trustee and get paid, it's very difficult to get that past the charity commission. Yeah. So you might need to consider your options, and it might not be a charity that you want to set up. Do you come across the same kind of thing?
Yeah, obviously they have this great idea and they want to give back something back to the community, and I think CICs are something relatively new in terms of that type of organisation. So everybody thinks a charity, it must be a charity that I want to set up. But as you say, if they want to have overall control of how that charity is run, then they not, as you said, the charity commission isn't going to allow that normally under normal circumstances. So it tends to be that the founder will find the charity and then step back from it, and then the board of trustees will obviously then take over with the running and how things go. So yeah, power is one of the main things that tend to be discussed, and we have actually dealt with a couple of charities who have set up a charity and not realized, gone into it completely blind, set up a charity and then spoken to us and not realized how restricted they're going to be moving forward, and have obviously had to shut down and start something else up. So yeah, it's definitely one of the key factors to be considered.
Yeah, very complicated means to close down something once you've started it up as well. And you know, CICs are certainly growing at the moment. From our perspective, we see a lot more coming through the doors.
I think also a lot of people set up charities and they don't realise, I'm going to use a really technical term here, all the gubbins that go around it. So all the governance requirements that you have, so having properly minuted regular trustee meetings, having a conflict of interest policy and having declaration of interest forms completed, understanding what a conflict of interest is, because a lot of people don't realize, they just think, oh well, my husband does this, so surely he can do that for the charity. It's like, well, no, because you need to think about this and this. And also on the finance side, once you get over, depending on how you set up your charity, if you set it up as a charitable company and register with the Charity Commission, obviously you've got dual registration, you have to produce accounts in a charity sort format. Why you do that now and a CIO is available, I'm not sure, but some people still do. And I think a lot of old style legal firms will still advise people to do that because they're not perhaps fully aware of with the CIO model. And then obviously below a certain turnover, if you're CIO, you can just do receipts and payments accounts, but there's still additional disclosures which are vastly different from company accounts.
Obviously the Charity Commission aren't anything like Companies House. They like a lot of control, a lot of transparency. Obviously charities have to be transparent anyway, but the governance and having the policies in place is something, regardless of whether you're a small charity or a large charity, the rules are the same. So you need to make sure that those sort of things are in place. And then obviously depending on what area and the charity's in, there could be other factors, so safeguarding, that sort of thing, that you also need to consider as well.
And I think conflicts of interest have been quite heavily in the press lately, haven't they?
Very much so.
I won't name the name, but there was that big case where they just didn't realise that they were actually farming it all off to their family, and lots of money was changing hands. So it's about understanding the structure, not just having the company set up or the charity set up for you, but it's all the intricacies that go into it, and having somewhere that can be that point of advice, to go over it. And if you don't have that, maybe it's a business manager that has a history of working with charities, or an accountant or a lawyer that's there in the background that can help you with that. But you certainly shouldn't go into it blind and think that it's an easy route to go down. Conflicts of interest are very litigious.
Yes, and you can get yourself into a right pickle, I think, as we've seen in the press quite recently.
Yes, definitely, absolutely.
I think another thing that people don't realise, and the difference between charities and KICs, is that KICs are liable for corporation tax. Yes. I mean, charities can be if they've got a level of trading.
But
I think people, they almost think, oh, we're a KIC, so we don't need to pay corporation tax. Well, actually, no, that's not necessarily true, depending on how you're getting your money in, if it's from trading, if it's from grants, how the grant agreement is worded is a key one. Is it a grant? Is it a contract?
Yeah, definitely. That is a big one that you see quite a lot.
And tax reliefs as well. People think that they're going to be entitled to the tax reliefs like charities are, and they're not. So it's completely different setup from that aspect, or from lots of aspects. So And the asset lock as well with a KIC is something people just don't realise, and they think that they're going to be able to use their assets like a limited company can, and it's not like that at all. There is a dividend cap as well, so obviously you can't pay out all your profits in dividends. There's a cap on how much you can pay out, and the asset lock also locks in the assets. So if the KIC shuts down or it gets wound up, then you can't just freely sell those assets and the shareholders take the share. It has to be passed to another community interest company or another charitable organisation. So
again, I don't think a lot of people realise that when setting up a KIC. And they don't think in terms of the asset lock who that should go to. They don't have that thought process. They just think, oh, we'll just carry on. And it's interesting in it's interesting in what you said about the dividends, because obviously there's two different types of KICs as well, isn't there?
So a lot by guarantee.
Shares and by guarantee. And most people, I think, set up by guarantee. Probably inadvertently, potentially.
I think that's, again, not getting that proper advice before they set it up, to work out what structure is going to work best for them, because obviously by guarantee means that there's no shareholders, so there's no share of profits, but by guarantee will open up more doors in terms of grants and funding. So you just got to weigh up what works best for you and for the community interest company as a whole.
Very much so. I also think on the kick side thing, what you said about getting the advice up front is really important, because actually if you have these conversations, it might end up that actually a kick's not right, and a charity's not right
either. Yeah, we had a conversation with somebody a few months ago that wanted to set up a kick and came to us for some advice. They'd already set up a limited company, but they wanted to run a proportion of it as non-for-profit, and they were looking into a kick, and it wasn't until we explained all the things about the asset lock and the dividend cap and everything, and they worked out that it wasn't really right for them, and they would just run it as a limited company but have a proportion that was non-for-profit and was put back into the community and to charities. So
it's really important, is it, that people don't go into blind, because where a kick you can set up in 15 minutes online through Companies House, which is very different from setting up a charity with the Charity Commission, which
with all the forms,
with everything that you've got to do as well to
the record keeping
process, the record keeping, the drafting of the constitution. So whilst they do provide draft constitutions, there's a lot of things to think about, having all the trustees sign to say they're eligible, there's so much that goes into it. What I have found, and you might have come across this as well, is some people set up a kick because it's a quick way to do it and then think we'll convert to a charity later down the line. But again, there's complexities in doing that as well.
Absolutely. It could have been much more straightforward just to set up as a charity initially rather than trying to do the changeover, because as you say, that brings obstacles in your way anyway. So definitely.
I think that's why it's so important to emphasize that do it first, get that advice first, don't bootstrap it or wing it just for want of better words, and then think about all the logistics and the laws and the tax and everything else afterwards. That trying to unravel what someone else has done is actually more costly than had you done it right to start with. And I think that's something that doesn't necessarily hit home with people until they experience it. So definitely the beginning is the key there.
And I think people have this idea that they want to set up some sort of community interest or some sort of non-for-profit, and as you say, because a kick is so easy and they might just be one person, and you can set up a kick with just one director, so they've got this idea and they think, yes, we'll do that, and then it will go from there. But again, a kick might not be right, and obviously with a charity you have to have 3 trustees, so you have to then put your feelers out to your network and see if you can bring on any trustees to the charity. So I think it tends to be something you should have a slow thought process over, rather than, I've got this idea, let's just do it. So
I completely agree, especially around finding trustees. That can be quite tricky, because it's essential you get the right trustees as well. Because you don't, what's the word I'm trying to say? You don't want the same thought processes going on. So it's always,
everybody,
you
want that difference of opinion.
Very much so. One of the things I try and encourage my charities to do when they're recruiting for trustees is go to open advertising. Because it's very easy to go, I know so and so, they'll come on. And I'm sure you're a bit like me, being an accountant. I often get asked to be a trustee because they need a finance person, and I suspect you guys get asked because they need a legal person. And when I try and say to you, well, why do you need that person? They can't articulate why they need somebody with a legal background. And one of the examples I tend to use is, so you need a legal person, but for what? Because actually charity law is very different from property law, which is very different from employment law, which is
it's a completely different specialism. And unless you've got a lawyer that's got that specialism, then you could have Joe Bloggs down the road or the lawyer. It wouldn't make much difference. So
I think from a lawyer perspective as well, any lawyer that's worth their salt, they will only touch the areas that they're competent in. So for instance, I would never pick up immigration law. I've never studied it. I think we probably did, I don't know, maybe a 6-week thing 20 years ago or whatever. So we would never touch on that. And I think, a lawyer isn't a lawyer, same as an accountant. you know, you all have your niches, you all have your specialties, don't you? So it's not necessarily a good idea to have an accountant or a lawyer. And believe it or not, we've seen quite a few disputes between charity trustees that have got quite messy because they've hired, or they've gone with their friends, they've gone with that immediate circle that they have, who are likely, or who you think are going to be on the same mindset, have the same ideas, you know, follow that through. But actually, it's just been an absolute nightmare. And then having to remove a trustee as well.
You've got to find a replacement before you can be removed as a trustee, which is a battle in itself. So
especially if you're just down to the 3 trustees. I think what a lot of people don't realise, especially if you're dealing with an older charity governing document, is that not all of them having the power to remove trustees.
Yeah, exactly.
As the modern documents tend to have the power to remove trustees, they have the dissolution clause in. A lot of the older style charities don't have what we would consider to be up-to-date governance standards. In there,
similar to limited companies, actually, with the directors and being a sole director, there's been whole case law on it, but obviously that's completely off topic, so we won't discuss that today. But yeah, very similar situation.
And what kind of queries do people come to you with then about the KICs and charities and things like that?
I think a lot of them initially, they want to know what they can and can't do with the 2 different models. So obviously what doors will open for them if they set up a KIC, and what doors would open for them if they set up a charity. And as you mentioned at the start, is that control element as well. People don't realize that that's very restrictive when you set up a charity. So Kirsty, can you think of anything else?
No, I think that's mainly the primary one. We've been pretty lucky that all of the what we've dealt with have been from the beginning. So we've only dealt with a few sort of 2-3 years in, and there's disputes there. So, you know, like we say, we catch them early, and it's always about that control element and what they can do with the finances. That's a key important issue for them.
And what policies they need in place, and what documentation they need to have in place, and just trying to work out who they can and can't work with. You know, as you mentioned, family members are a definite no. So yeah, just catching them early is really important.
We always say it's important. Don't just think that you can go to a lawyer and that's enough. You need a lawyer and an accountant. You know, you will work together as a lawyer and accountant to get the information that you need. And you know, quite a few people do come to us and ask us accountancy questions, and we say no, but you know, you've stepped over and you need to seek the appropriate advice there. So it's about knowing that, you know, one person isn't going to do all of that for you, because it's unlikely to find a qualified accountant and lawyer as the same person.
Yeah, very much so. And I think one of the key things for a lot of people who are setting up is that funding that we've talked about. And there are some funders out there who will fund wider than just charities. They will fund KICs and other forms of non-profit. But the majority of funders will only fund charities, and that's understandable because of the level of compliance that you have to go through as a charity, and the reporting that you have to do, and all the policies you have to have in place, and all the disclosures you have to make in your accounts as well. I mean,
to protect the funding, definitely.
If you look at a set of company accounts of a small company compared to a small charity, well, the charities won't go onto pages because the trustees' annual report has to have certain information in it, and then you have to have certain disclosures in your accounts, and sometimes that's a lot more information than people are wanting to share.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you can almost hide behind limited company accounts to a certain extent. You don't have to put your whole company on display, do you? You know, whereas it's certainly not the case in a charity. The world knows everything.
Oh yes, I mean,
much more transparent.
Confession here, one of the first things I do as an accountant when I look at a set of charity accounts is I always go to the employment section and see what the highest paid person's getting.
Right.
I always do, because actually that's quite telling in itself, depending on the income of the charity. And the second thing I do is go to the reserves policy and see if it makes sense. With my accountant head on, whereas you wouldn't get those income accounts.
No, you wouldn't. You
wouldn't get that information revealed whatsoever. No.
But certainly charities, it's all there. So it's definitely in the public domain.
So that's really another consideration, isn't it? How
much do you want to
how
share?
much do you want to share?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. And as you've mentioned, the funding, obviously there's obviously more funding available to charities, but I think a lot of people that come to us for advice don't realize that if you set up a kick as shares rather than by guarantee, then those doors are very, very hard to open.
Very much so, because obviously you can take profit out. So why would a funder give you the money to take the profit
and give to the shareholders? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Again, that's another consideration for people.
It is.
Can you think of anything else that people should really think about, apart from speaking to an accountant and a lawyer before doing anything? Are there any other considerations apart from the funding and the control?
I would say probably look at what you want to achieve. What are you trying to achieve from setting up the kick or the charity, and then work back from there, and how you can best achieve what you're looking to achieve, whether that would be a kick by shares, by guarantee, or whether it would just be setting up a charity to get where you want to be, for the community, for the community interest that you're looking to raise money for, or put something back into. Obviously with a kick, it's very different to a charity in terms of, obviously charity, why you've set the charity up is defined in law, for obviously the reasons why you want to give back or raise
charitable
funds
object. And you cannot go outside your charitable object.
Whereas for a kick, it can be very different, and it can be very different communities. It can be, it doesn't, on the face of it, it might not even look like a non-for-profit or a community interest, but as long as you can achieve those goals in the from the outset, then obviously you know that you can reach your goals from that type of setup. So yeah, it's just looking at what you want to achieve and then seeing what works best and what setup's going to be best to get to that point.
I think, and linking to that, obviously there are only certain charitable purposes you can have. So it's defined in law what the charitable purposes are. And I think a lot of people also don't realise, as we just talked about, that once you have your charitable object, you cannot go.
You can't go
beyond that.
No.
You can't.
Yeah.
And that can be restrictive in itself, because if you do want to change your charitable object, you then have to go back to the Charity Commission, and they're not necessarily going to say yes.
Change it. No, exactly.
So a lot of hoops to jump through, and paperwork and legalities and everything. So know your purpose from day one, really, isn't it?
Brilliant. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. I think the key point that's come out of this is, please speak to someone before either applying to become a charity or a kick, and make sure the person you speak to knows what they're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Not reinforce that.
And what you'll often find is, if you speak to an accountant will often have some lawyer contacts that they know work within that sector, so they can always refer you, and vice versa. Lawyers tend to have accountants that they know that specifically work in those sectors, so you can usually get some good contacts from one or the other, but just go to one or the other first.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate the time that you've taken.
No problem, Emma. Lovely talking to you.